Experts on the history of the Ukrainian Church do not like to recall the Synodal period of the 18th and 19th centuries. They claim that nothing happened in those times. Speaking of trivial things, nothing actually happened. But there were two important processes that took place then. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church ceased to exist, and the role of the spiritual leader of the nation was taken over by the Uniate Church. In other words, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was in a difficult situation on the territory of the Russian Empire. In 1795, Metropolitan Theodosius Rostotsky was arrested and deprived of the right to contact church believers. Subsequently, metropolitans began to appoint the Moscow Synod, and in 1839, Moscow unified the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church with the Russian Orthodox Church. Greek Catholics only felt free on the lands that were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. The role of the Greek Catholic Church as the political leadership of the nation is quite obvious. After all, it was the Russian Trinity that stood up to defend the rights of Ukrainians. Who were the organizers of the Russian Trinity? Either Greek Catholic priests or children of priests. The Supreme Ruthenian Council in Lviv was the first representative body of the Ukrainian people in Austria-Hungary in 1848 during the Spring of the Peoples. Who organized the Supreme Ruthenian Council? The Greek Catholic clergyman.
1848 рік під час весни народів. Хто організував головну руську раду? Греко-католицьке священництво.
The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is the largest of the Eastern Catholic churches. In Ukraine and among its diaspora, there are over 5.5 million faithful to it. The UGCC is the only church, one among all Ukrainian Christian churches, that maintains a stable hierarchical continuity from the Kiev metropolis founded in the 10th century by Prince Volodymyr. Peculiarity of the Catholic churches of the Eastern Rite is that they recognize the spiritual kinship. The peculiarity of the Catholic churches of the Eastern Rite is that they recognize the spiritual kinship with the first, by definition, Christian bishop, the Pope. But at the same time, the Eastern Byzantine liturgical tradition is preserved in the UGCC. This was made possible by the Brest Union of 1596. Then, the Metropolitan of Kiev, Mikhailo Rohoza, and 8 more hierarchs of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the time withdrew from subservience to the Patriarch of Constantinople and concluded an agreement with the Roman papacy. The agreement, Unia, consisted of 33 articles, which clearly stated that Rome would not interfere with the theological, liturgical, and canonical tradition of the Uniate Church. But they failed to keep the identity of the Church. During the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, the Church was Romanized, slowly though inexorably. In particular, the Church began to recognize the Filioque dogma that the Holy Spirit descended not only from God the Father, but also from God the Son, which the Orthodox churches do not recognize. Due to this, there was a schism between the Catholic and Orthodox churches in the 10th century. The Ukrainian Orthodox clergy suffered equally from the Russian authorities. It is known to very few people, but with the formation of the Synod in 1721, Tsar Peter the Great introduced the institution of the Inquisition, headed by the Proto-Inquisitor, who was subordinated to provincial inquisitors. And all of them had to perform police supervision of the priests, mostly non-Russian dioceses. Although, due to the mass discontent of the clergy, the institution of the Orthodox Inquisition was abolished in 1729. However, the police supervision of the priests was re-entrusted to gendarmes. The latter often treated the priests just the same way they treated serfs. As a consequence, by the end of the 18th century, the clergy were mostly intimidated and closely followed any instructions of the Synod, no matter how absurd they might have seemed.
На жаль, українське духовенство
Unfortunately, the Ukrainian clergy did not show a strong initiative to preserve national traditions during that period. And let's just say that for the classical period of the Synodal era, namely in the 19th century, it was only in 1849 that Vasil Krachulevich, a priest from Podil, became the only priest who delivered sermons in the Ukrainian language.
Став єдиним священником, який видав проповіді українською мовою.
These sermons were read many times in the church of Vyshhorod by the famous author of the Ukrainian national anthem, Pavlo Chubinsky. In 1862, while another activist of the Ukrainian revival, Pantilimon Kulish, issued them as a separate collection. The collection was called Sermons in the Little Russian Language of the Archpriest and Knight Vasil Krachulevich. Krachulevich also published catechism teachings and explanations to the Seven Sacraments in the Ukrainian language in 1858. Although there were some cases where secular people also tried to revive Ukrainian spirituality, with nobleman Pilip Murachevsky among them.
Важливою сторінкою, безперечно, цього етапу є також переклад.
An important page of that phase was also the translation of the four Gospels into Ukrainian by Pilip Murachevsky. He was the inspector of the Prince Bezborodko-Nizhyn Lyceum, who was a native of the Chernihiv Oblast. The leadership successfully put that translation on the back burner, which was only published in the period of 1906 to 1911. The absence of mass instances of resistance to the Russification of the Ukrainian army was the result of another factor of the Russification of the Ukrainian Church was the secularization of church lands by the Empress Catherine II. The Ukrainian Church was very rich for a long time, primarily due to the fact that there were many noblemen amongst church hierarchs. For example, Petro Mahila was a descendant of a family of Moldovan rulers, and the Cossack elite donated large amounts of money to the church. Remember, for instance, in the patronage of Hetman Ivan Mazepa, the church used the donations to maintain numerous schools and hospitals for the poor. In general, even in the 18th century. In fact, there was practically no diocese in Ukraine that did not have its own schools.
У містечку Васильків, що неподалік Києва.
In the town of Vasilkiv, which is near Kiev, parochial schools were documented as far back as the 17th century. That tradition was not interrupted even in the 19th century. It was expanded thanks to the Ukrainian clergy.
Вона була розгорнута завдяки українському духовенству. Можна привести декілька прикладів.
There are several examples. 3 parish schools operate in the cathedral church in honor of Saint Anthony and Saint Theodosius.
Парафіальні школи.
These churches educated patriots of Ukraine, defenders of ancient rights and liberties. However, these traditional Ukrainian schools began to decline as soon as the policy of Russification was started by the leaders of the Kievan Church. From Peter the Great to Catherine II, the personnel policy of imperial mixing operated. Ukrainian bishops were sent to serve in distant parishes, and Russians were planted in the Kiev Metropolitanate. They were obedient executors of the Tsar's will. In the second half of the 18th century, such Russifiers were Metropolitans Gabriel Kremenitsky, Samuel Myslavsky, and Archimandrite Melchizedek Znachko-Yavorsky. In 1761, the representatives of the Russian clergy Melchizedek Znachko-Yavorsky and Gervasy Linzavetsky planned to subordinate the right bank parishes to the Moscow Church. In response, they received popular indignation, and there was an uprising led by Zhabotinsky Sotnik Kharka, which occurred in 1765 to 1766. The key result of that uprising was that Melchizedek Znachko-Yavorsky was thrown back to the left bank and was strictly forbidden to appear on the right bank of the Dnipro River. It was still possible in the 18th century. However, there was almost nobody to advocate traditional Ukrainian Orthodoxy in the 19th century. That is why the clergy, the Ukrainian gentry, and the intelligentsia had identified with Russia instead of Ukraine by that point. The slogan of that era might be the words scrawled on the prison wall by one of the final Ukrainian rebels, Metropolitan Arseny Matsievich. The words are as follows: "It is good for me because you have humbled me."
Цими діями Мельхіседека тоді якраз скористалася українська.
The Greek Catholic Church at that time took advantage of such actions of Melchizedek Znaczky-Havorski. It was called the Uniate, and its center was in Radomysl. That church, with the support of the local landlords under the pretext of opposing the Moscow expansion, began forceful planting of Uniatism in those Orthodox parishes which were still, by agreement, under the control of Constantinople at the time.
На місцях вони залишалися під Константинополем.
It was the process of planting the Uniatism that later provoked the Haidamaki uprising, which went down in history as Koliyevshchina. But the beginning was in church affairs. First, the Russian Empire became its encroachment onto the Orthodox dioceses of the right bank of Ukraine, which were consequently defended by the Polish Commonwealth. It was so well defended, the Commonwealth began spreading Greek Catholicism. All those church maneuvers called widespread discontent among the common people, which eventually developed into bloody uprisings, from which both Poles and Russians suffered.
Греко-католицька церква, вона не пішла по шляху покатоличення українського народу, а вона навпаки зберігала українське.
The Greek Catholic Church did not follow the path of Catholicizing Ukrainians. On the contrary, it preserved the Ukrainian people. And the Poles realized that, but unfortunately this realization came late. They contributed to the Uniate process in every possible way. Both the Polish king and Senate provided support. They thought they could eventually Catholicize and subsequently turn the Ukrainian masses into Poles. But they realized that this church remained in the Kievan tradition. Then the struggle against Greek Catholics began.
Не відходить від канонів, так скажемо, українських, залишається на тому, на чому вона вже існувала. Тоді починається боротьба проти греко-католиків.
In 1717, the Polish king signed a directive document, which historians called On the Destruction of Russia. It provided for, in various ways, compromising both the church itself and individual priests. The goal was to divert the Ukrainian population from it, but it was not easy because the Uniate priests experienced the same national oppression on the part of the Poles as did their believers, the peasants. That external pressure forced the Greek Catholic clergy and the Ukrainian peasantry to become closer, because the latter had nobody else to rely on.
Щоб було зрозуміло, у що перетворила православну церкву державна політика Російської імперії, почитаємо діяння настоятеля Києва.
To make clear what the state policy of the Russian Empire turned the Orthodox Church into, we will read about the deeds of the rector of the St. Michael's Golden Dome Monastery. Here is how it was described by Metropolitan Hilarion Ochienko. His grace always, even during liturgy, reaches such an enraged state that he could set someone's beard on fire, tear out a handful of someone's hair, hit someone in the face, or kick somebody in the stomach. He does all that while cursing the whole church, wherever that may be, at the altar or in the middle of the church, especially when putting on holy garments. It is not surprising that people did not want such priests. As a result, people began to lose faith in the Orthodox Church. Subsequently, the thinking population, or the intelligentsia, departed from the perception of faith completely, moving towards atheism. Moreover, that trend had already been dominant in Europe.
Початок 20-го століття, то в Росії...
By the beginning of the 20th century, the intelligentsia and students in Russia believed that it was fashionable to be an atheist and that a believing person was lagging behind the scientific and technological progress that engulfed the 19th century. And, in fact, the Ukrainian Revolution of 1917-1920s immediately raised the question, how should the church feel during a state crisis?
І, власне, українська і російська революція 1917 років, то одразу ж поставили питання із кризою державності про те, а як має в цих умовах себе почувати церква.
Як це не химера?
Strange as it might sound, the atheist policy of the Bolsheviks, who came to power in Ukraine, greatly contributed to the fact that the Russian Orthodox Church lost its ground. In 1917, it renewed the patriarchal status and was perhaps the main mechanism in the struggle to restore the old retrograde Russian Empire. But that is a topic for another time. In the meantime, remember that every phenomenon has its pros and cons, its pro et contra.
Це вже тема для наступних програм. Наразі пам'ятайте, що кожне явище має своє за і проти, своє про, контра.